our territory and share these spaces. I want to thank everyone because these capacity buildings and sessions have been very helpful as youth to be able to share these spaces in our communities as well. So I think that our struggle as Indigenous women and as youth is just beginning. We're still fighting in the different spaces so that we can be considered. And I think that especially the great leaders, female leaders that accompany us, continue to give us strength to make sure that we can strengthen ourselves as women and in the territory as sisters as well. So I wanted to greet everyone and thank you for this space. Thank you, Nariet. We see Omaira Kasama. She has her hand up. First of all, hello, greetings from Panama, from my Ibezi territory in Dulegaya. I wanted to share with you because I was able to come in with the presentation of Florina, a very important matter on gender and how we consider it as Indigenous women. Because in some of the meetings, the gender perspective for Indigenous women, maybe it doesn't exist, but we can adapt it and we can bring it into the medium where we find ourselves. Sometimes we just have to think about that maybe in the process of building ourselves as teachers, maybe we forgot to translate it or write it down. And when we translated it, then in the process, we understand that gender is everything that we've shared in terms of complementarity and duality. Men and women are both important, and we don't want to leave anyone behind. But as women, what we find or what we're trying to find is a way to strengthen these fights that force us or maintain us to really defend all of these causes because traditional knowledge is such an important tool that we have to defend it between all of us. And also in the inclusion of youth because they're the ones that are going to receive all of this knowledge. And I think that we are in the midst of a situation where we need to be better teachers, better guardians, and part of this also means having strategic alliances of people that Indigenous women continue to play an important role, and that's why we have to continue to strengthen ourselves and build our capacities. And when we talk about gender, we also have to think about how to eradicate the violence that maintains inequality present. Many times it keeps us attached, all of the violence and discrimination forms, and we're trying to find a way to remove ourselves from it. And it's in practice, it's how to eradicate violence. And this, we will only obtain it by strengthening the organization of Indigenous women that are trying to find education, by improving the quality of life and really strengthening the identity of Indigenous people. And the planet invites us to continue to protect it through traditional knowledge that we already possess as Indigenous women and to pass it on to future generations, to leave this legacy as a book that will continuously be open and be learned from. I just wanted to share that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amaira. Graciela Coy. Graciela. I didn't raise my hand. Well, you have your hand raised.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Un gusto saludarles desde acá
It's a
desde
pleasure
Guatemala. Muchas gracias por
to
la
greet you from
presentación.
Guatemala. Thank you
Es
for both
importante
presentations. It's
realmente,
so important,
son
really.
importantes toda esta información que ustedes nos han
All this information
socializado.
that you have offered
Realmente
us.
desde acá en Guatemala, nosotros pues como organización indígena
As an
trabajamos
indigenous organization in
principalmente en el
Guatemala, we
fomento de las
specifically work
capacidades de
on
mujeres en nuestro
capacity building
territorio.
of
Creo
young
que
women and
todo el
girls.
trabajo que ustedes han presentado
So, all the work that
valoro
you've
inmensamente y
presented and the
reconozco
achievements,
lo que
especially the
alcanzado
achievements
tanto
that
a
have been
nivel
obtained
internacional, pues justamente
both on an
es una lucha,
international
es
level
una lucha, es
specifically and
algo que hemos
locally. It is a
tenido
struggle, and I wanted
las
to
compañeras que han
congratulate
presentado, porque hemos
everyone who
estado
has
más que todo
presented
creo
because
que
I saw you, I've seen you on social media, especially
pues
Facebook. I think that you both have a long
es un buen
trajectory, and I
impulso
think this is a
para nosotras
great
las que vamos atrás y
example for us.
también nosotras estamos trabajando
And in
en
Guatemala, we have been
proyectos
working very
en el
hard
Anectamid, en el
with the
empoderamiento de las
Anectamit
niñas y
Association
niñas
empowering
indígenas
young women and
con
girls,
proyectos
especially
con
indigenous young women and girls, because
hablando
as you
de la
know,
participación
when we talk
desde
about
lo político ha sido bastante
political
complicado para las
participation,
personas que
it has been quite
prácticamente no son
complicated. There's very
participantes
few
de los espacios de toma
women
de decisiones.
participating in the
Realmente
decision-making
hablando
process,
específicamente en el
especially
Congreso, hay
in the
cero
Congress
mujeres participantes
specifically.
no más. Entonces, es un problema bastante fuerte. Sin embargo, pues nosotros
So
como
this is a massive problem. However, as an organization and as
tenemos la
Indigenous
oportunidad
women,
también de poder
we've
seguir
had this
adelante
opportunity to be able
y
to move
tenemos
forward.
este compromiso también de
And we
apoyar
also have
a
this
otras
commitment
mujeres
to
de otros
support other
diferentes
women
ambientes, como
and
ya
young girls
mencionaron
that
en
are part of
Guatemala.
different communities
También
in
aquí en Ecuador
Guatemala.
está conectada doña Lola.
And so here we have Nyalola and other people here. These are examples of women who have had
Más
their
que todo,
impact and who have fought really hard.
nada
It's not easy to have
principal en que
impact.
se ha avanzado es
And all the
por
progress
la
that we've
educación
had
de las niñas
is
y sobre
based
todo
on
la
our
cultura
struggle
también de
and
invertir
based on
mucho
investment as
tiempo,
well,
recursos, tanto técnico
time and
y
resources.
claro, esa parte. No es tan fácil
It
decir,
is
bueno,
quite
pues me voy
complicated.
a
It's not
otro
as easy to
país
say, okay, I'm going to go to a
a
different
trabajar.
country. I'm going to
Requiere
participate in
recursos
international
económicos,
spaces.
gestionar
We require
vencer miedos,
financial resources and to overcome fears as well. Because if we talk
las
about women
comunidades es
that
bastante
leave our
complicado.
community, it is
Entonces,
quite complicated.
el primer paso es eso, ¿verdad? El empoderamiento, la educación.
So, empowerment and
Recientemente
education
tuvimos
are
una
vital.
reunión en el Congreso con un diputado y nos
We
cuestionaba,
had a
decía,
meeting
bueno,
with
¿y por qué no toman el
one of
curso
our
de
Congress
choque?
members, for instance, and we
Y
asked,
estábamos ahí pensando, ¿y cómo?
he
¿Por
asked,
qué no
how
toman el
do
curso las
women
mujeres?
take power,
Y
right?
nosotros lo que mencionamos primero, hay que
And what we
empoderarlas
said
a través de
is
la
that we have to
educación.
empower them
Porque
through
lastimosamente
education.
es uno de los países
Because Guatemala is one of those
más
countries that is
fuertemente
currently
afectado por los embarazos en niñas entre
affected
las edades de 10 a 14 años.
by
Y esto
child
afecta en la
pregnancies,
región
especially
de
between
nuestra
girls
provincia.
of 10 to
También
14
tenemos
years
una
old. And in this
intervención
region where we
en el
work,
norte
we
de Guatemala, en
also
Hortencia,
have an intervention in the
donde
northern part of
técnicamente la
Guatemala,
mayoría de su población
where
es
most of the
indígena,
population is
maya quechí.
indigenous,
Entonces nuestra
Maya
intervención ha
Kichi.
sido fuerte en lo que es
So
la
our role has been
implementación a
very
través de la
strong, trying
educación
to
también
empower
y la
women through
empleabilidad
education,
también, porque acá
employability as well,
estamos
because
localizados en el Triángulo
we are
Norte
located
y es
in the Northern Triangle.
una región que es
It's
expulsora
a country
de
or a
migrantes.
region that really kicks out a lot of
Uno sale
migrants.
del
And we
país
see that when
y
people leave the
sufre
country,
violencia en
they
todos
suffer
lados.
a lot of
Nuestro trabajo ha
violence.
sido bastante fuerte en ese sentido
So our
y
work has been very
conectar a
strong,
los jóvenes, a las
trying to
mujeres,
connect youth
a
and
un
women
empleo, que tengan un ingreso
so that they
económico
can
para
find a
poder
job and that
valerse
they
y
have an
así
income.
vemos la
Because
autonomía
this is
de
where we
las mujeres.
see the
Entonces yo
autonomy
le
of
preguntaba,
women.
¿verdad? ¿Cómo obtiene el poder la mujer? Al tener recursos
And so when he
económicos, ¿verdad?
asks, how do we
Entonces
obtain
sí es cierto porque en el Congreso vemos que más
power?
que todo es
Then
complejo
this is the
porque
way, right?
ahí
Because we understand that
podemos
in the
participar y
political
movernos
environment,
con
there's a lot that
recursos económicos.
is moved by
Vamos
money.
avanzando, vamos
And so if
avanzando,
we
porque
cannot
yo
continue
sí
to
he visto
progress and advance if we don't have
que
financial
participan
resources. But we do see small
hemos
achievements.
participado de
Here
algunos
in Guatemala, we have
proyectos
participated in some
también.
political spaces.
Los hemos inaugurado, hemos conformado
We've also been a part of some of the launches of spaces. There's also a chapter of Indigenous Women's Network on Biodiversity, and we've also been a founding member, participating actively in different associations and different spaces. We're also part of the Indigenous Table on Climate Change. And the Ministry of Environment also considers us and invites us to create the Gender National Plan. Even though when we go to the COP, for instance, we don't see a lot of advancements, but we have to be present, right? We have to be there in person. Otherwise, they ignore us. And so we have to be making our own impact. And I think that that has been the role that we've had. And we keep communication open with some ministries. Although when we get there to try and do some kind of decision, they say, okay, but if you work with Indigenous people supporting Indigenous women, oh, I apologize, there are no resources. That's what we always hear. So that's what we want to see, having leaders in different countries to fight to obtain the financial resources and defending local organizations. I think that this is very important. Something that you've created in the spaces that you've obtained on an international level, and we just have to follow through, right? Because we have to continue on this fight, continue with the lobbying. That's what I wanted to say about what we do here in Guatemala as a community indigenous organization. Thank you. Great contributions. We have a question here, I think directed to both. What would be the main challenges for COP16? And really, what can we expect from these international spaces where there's negotiation? And what is our responsibility or challenge as peoples, as women and youth, faced with the environmental crisis, the transmission of knowledge, the loss of biodiversity that we are currently living in our indigenous territories?
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, los aportes han sido interesantes y yo creo que las
Yes, thank you
experiencias
for your
de este
contributions.
trabajo, pues estamos haciendo
And
mayores
it really shows all of the work that we're doing as women in this context with organizations and local communities, etc.
justamente los aportes, los insumos que nos
And these
fortalecen
are
y
the
nos ayudan
contributions that
a
strengthen us
trabajar.
and that help us to continue
Estamos
to
pues
work and to
satisfechas
grow and to
porque el
have
trabajo
these
a
voices and
nivel local, a
experiences
nivel
shared
nacional,
on a local and national
sea
level
impulsada justamente por parte
means that we can
de los
actually
estados con
promote it
programas y con
from
políticas de
the
apoyo y
different
todo eso. Entonces,
countries
uno
and
de los retos
governments
más
so
grandes
that
que
they can
tenemos es
promote all of this.
justamente la
Because one of the
accesibilidad
main challenges that we have is specifically having
mejor
access
en
to
la
economic
coordinación
resources. And talking
de los
about the
principales
question,
retos para esta
what are our main
COP16,
challenges for
porque
COP16?
nosotros como pueblos
Well,
indígenas en
as
general
Indigenous
estamos
people,
viendo que los
on a
retos
general level, we
que
see
tenemos
that the big
justamente es
challenges that we
de que los
currently
estados en
have
realidad se comprometan en la
is to see if the
implementación
states
de
can
estas
actually
políticas de
commit
diversidad 2030, porque
to the
nosotros hemos
framework on
escuchado las metas
biodiversity
de Aichi,
because it was
como por
part of
ejemplo
the goals of
el
Aichi. There was a
programa
plan for a program
sobre artículo 8J,
on a working group
y
on
otros
the
tantos
Article
que los estados no
8J and
cumplen
so many others
las
where the governments have not
normas
complied
actuales.
with,
Y
for
ahora con
instance,
este nuevo
the
marco
objectives of Aichi. And with this new global
tenemos
framework, we're hoping that the
implementadas
23 goals are implemented
estrategias nacionales que tienen los
through
estados.
national strategies that
Y uno
governments
de los mayores
have.
desafíos
Because one of the
es
main challenges that we have
lograr de ellos
in
que se comprometen
COP16
con
is to actually
asignar
have them
recursos
commit to
financieros
assigning
para
financial
los países, para
resources
los
to the
indígenas,
organizations, to indigenous
con los
peoples,
sistemas o las estructuras que tengan, ¿no? Los
with the
nuevos
structures
reglamentos
that they may have
en ese contexto para poder apoyar, para
in
poder
that context to be able to support and
plena y efectiva,
participate
como lo dice bien claro,
fully,
y que sea
as is
realmente
properly said, and to have a real
estas
participation,
personas que
not
ya
through two or three people that are already
tenemos pueblos
present
indígenas, ya tenemos su consentimiento libre previo informado, cuando en realidad
and we have a
la
previous
realidad es que
informed
no, ¿no? Que
consent,
que podamos
So the idea is to really be able to have more participation. So one of the challenges for COP16 also is how is this going to, because this is going to happen in Cali, Colombia, I believe that there's going to be a lot of people present, and one of the challenges is to make sure that those people, men and women, have the opportunity to read all of the documents so that they can arrive with proposals according to all of the negotiations that have moved forward. Unfortunately, and this is my experience, when we arrive to this new area or space for the first time, we find a different reality of what we assumed was going to happen. We have different ideas of claims that we would like to make when really, for the indigenous people through the Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, we are only allowed 3 minutes to present our proposals in a collective manner. So if there's a possibility of having other organizations participate as well, then great. But most times we've only been able to talk very quickly for 3 minutes to offer our recommendations. And so one of the challenges is how we can actually take all of these proposals in a consensual manner, with consensus. And specifically, we also have the mobilization of resources because GEF has said, okay, I'm going to offer this amount, but then how does these resources get assigned to Indigenous people? And another topic that we have in the agenda is the establishment of a permanent subsidiary body so that the working group based on Article 8J continues to work, creating a new working program. In these new jobs, how we're going to make sure that Indigenous people can participate. And in that same sense, that's one of the things that we have to work on. And one of the major obstacles that we have as women and youth is that there isn't enough open or openness, such as was saying the colleague Graciela, because we don't have the necessary financial resources to be able to reach these spaces that are basically that last for 3 weeks. If we see that there's another technical meeting to reach COP16, we've already had the recommendations, and the idea is to negotiate, right? To obtain these spaces of negotiation with our government representatives so that we can say these are the recommendations that we need your support on. Because to support a recommendation of Indigenous people, one or two states actually have to support it. They have to raise their hand and say, I support the recommendation of the International Indigenous Forum. But if no country raises their hand, then unfortunately the recommendation isn't approved. And so that's one of the main challenges that we have as well. For instance, yesterday we had a workshop with the Ministry of Environment, and we proposed the recommendations that we have as Indigenous people and as Indigenous women so that the delegation that goes already has an idea of what the recommendations are. And this should also happen in other countries. So what do we expect of these international spaces of negotiation? Exactly that, to make sure that we are heard. When we reach the different countries, they say, okay, here we've had the representatives of Indigenous people, let's work with them. Because when it's on a national level, as Graciela was saying, we go to institutions and they say, there's no resources, and that's the human resources are very limited. There's only a couple of people working on it. And many times the lack of knowledge, they don't have the information, they don't know what happened or what the results are. And so we expect that in these negotiations, the key points, aside from our specific issues, we want to have a collective recommendation, understanding that we also have specifics that we each want, but negotiations happen so quickly, and we also have to be always there and present to make sure that we hear what is being said. So we're hoping that these agreements are actual commitments, especially a moral commitment to say, I accepted this, my state accepted it, so why can't we implement it when we reach our countries? And so that's our expectation, to make sure that the representatives that are there have that follow through and are able to work on a national level. And so everything that is achieved on the national and international conventions continues to recognize the rights of Indigenous people, especially when we talk about the rights of those that defend the environment, men and women that have fought and lost their life defending this biodiversity. So that's really the idea. And what's our challenge or responsibility? Having young women share this information, how when we reach our countries, we need to be able to work with the different institutions and our organizations and with our authorities, because many times we talk about it, but there's an obstacle there, a difference of opinion, because they don't have enough information. And so there's this gap, and no one's a prophet in their own land. And so many of these things we know actually happen. And so our responsibility and the responsibility of the youth is exactly that, understanding all of the documents that are in the Secretariat pages. Currently, there's no reason to say, I don't know about this topic. The technology is available, social networks are available. The web pages of so many organizations that work specifically on this matter are available. And I know that youth is able to navigate all this information and obtain it from their own home, in their own communities, with their authorities. And so that's our challenge, finding a way to continue advancing and to be able to share this intergenerational information that we have and to be able to share this experience with our elders and our authorities so that we can have these resources. We also have to understand what our own history, what our identity has to be strengthened there. And so, faced with the environmental crisis, we have to continue to revindicate and revitalize all of our knowledges and all of this lobby together with Indigenous and women and men, both professional and non-professional, the elders, authorities, our maximum authorities in the territories to share this space. So that's what I can say quickly. I know that Lola also wants to speak, and I think that our time has come to an end. Yes, unfortunately, it's noon. I think we have interpretation until noon. So let's quickly give the word to Lola before closing. I just wanted to say hello to all my sisters here. Florina, in her last intervention, I believe, she said what I wanted to highlight as well in terms of all the questions. Previously, I was in the Women's Caucus meeting, and I think we talked about the same things. And one of the questions is, what is our challenge for COP16 on biodiversity? And so that's the same thing that I was saying. Many times we have to be properly prepared so that we can make our position known in these negotiations. And we have to understand the coordination that we have in these negotiation processes, because this is really a situation where it is a challenge for us, for women, to see and fight that we have these ancestral knowledge recognized in our contribution as women in the conservation of biodiversity. I think that this is going to be very important to highlight this in the work that we're going to carry out, that are part of this working process and negotiation. I also think that it's important to see the respect and understand the transfer of technology and ancestral knowledge towards youth is very, very important. Because there's also a lot of questions regarding that. We know as Indigenous women, we have to understand how we do how we hand down the knowledge to our children so that they have a better future. And the access to funding is also going to be important in all of these meetings, especially access to direct funding to women. We've already talked about the access of direct funding for Indigenous people, but we've also talked about the access to Indigenous women specifically. Many times, due to administrative issues or political issues, or due to prerequisites, women's organizations can't actually access these resources easily. And if we can align with the different organizations that are led by our brothers, it's also something that is quite hard to do, and we all know that that's the case. Many times our projects and our processes aren't defined. It's more integral or more general, but we do believe that we need more direct financing that is defined in all of these projects that are going to be negotiated. I feel like that's one of our challenges, to fight so that all the work that has been concluded so far, it has to be leveraged and to make sure that it has an echo in all of these decisions of COP16. I think it's going to be a full process, and I think that our sister Florina and Yolanda and other sisters that have worked and have been a part of this process, they have the ability to continue to support this process and to lead it so that we can move forward. So that's all I wanted to say. I know that there's not enough time, and I want to greet everyone and congratulate everyone and wish you the best. Thank you.
María Choque tenía la mano levantada.
Maria had her hand up. Thank you, sisters. Very quickly, one of the matters of incidence in our countries, it has to be a direct relation with organizations and with the instances that we have in the ministries. But I think that it's important in the context of how we do have our impact. But it's also important in the spaces because we have the experience of the UN Declaration. We have more than 20 years of dialogue, of a relationship with the states and the governments. This is a situation where it was really hard to give way and find our way. So in terms of the CBD, it's also important to understand that the agendas have to be a part of this agenda and this effective participation of Indigenous women. And we don't always have the access to resources. We don't have the participation of workshops. So we have progressed because we've had very, very strong alliances and solidarity alliances in terms of the international cooperation, especially in terms of the CBD. So then I really ask everyone, I wish that the work that happens in Colombia is a work of impact and of unity. We can't contradict ourselves in these spaces because this this is very detrimental. We have to work in terms of unity. We've carried out very, very tough projects, but solidarity and unity have made it so that we can continue to progress. It's so important to be able to do lobbying and diplomacy and to be in those long hours of debate, sometimes without understanding English even. So for me, it's really important to have this process and to have this advancement. Okay, because we are already out of time, we wanted to thank everyone for their participation in this workshop and remind you that the next workshop is going to be in the next few weeks. And before we close, we're going to take a group photo.
No sé, Florina, ¿quién toma la foto grupal?
Florina, if you want to take the group photo. I don't know who's going to take it.
Randy, ¿estás ahí para que tomes la foto grupal?
Oh, Randy, are you there?
Yo no tengo cámara aquí en mi
I don't have a
computadora,
camera here in my computer,
a menos que la tome desde mi celular.
unless I take it with my cell phone.
Será, porque tampoco no sé cómo funciona desde aquí.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to do it
Se
either.
trata de ese curso
Randy?
de tecnología.
We need that technology course. Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yo ya lo
Maybe Zaida
hice.
can help us? I
Ya lo
already did
hice ya.
it.
Okay, muy
Oh,
bien.
you did? Okay, perfect.
Gracias. Bueno,
Thank
¿Una
you so
más?
much.
creo que
Gracias.
ya
Thank
podemos
you.
cerrar. Gracias.
We can close then. Thank you so much. A big hug to everyone.
Igual,
Congratulations on this day. Yes, thank you. Likewise.
Thank you, Lara, for staying for interpretation.
muchas gracias.